Thank you so much for taking time away from your families and obligations for this discussion. My name is Laura Sawyer, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Communication Association, a nonprofit association working to advance the scholarly study of human communication by encouraging and facilitating excellence in academic research worldwide. ICA is headquartered in Washington, D.C., in the US, but we have over 5,000 members in 80 countries around the globe. The idea for this web discussion series came from a series of articles called Left to Their Own Devices on the web platform Medium, which covered various topics surrounding teaching during a pandemic, authored by professors Vicky Katz and Amy Jordan, both at Rutgers University. After rapidly consuming a few of these insightful but approachable articles in a row, I contacted Amy and Vicky with excitement to ask if they would be willing to moderate a related discussion series as a resource for ICA members during the pandemic. So this is episode 2 of our series titled Burning the Candle at Both Ends, Juggling Academia, Parenting, and a Pandemic. As a parent myself of 2 boys, aged 14 and 6, and 2 rescue dogs, including a pandemic puppy, because apparently I do not know how to stop adding complications to my life, I am intimately familiar with this juggling act, and I am delighted to host this conversation. I am honored to introduce our moderator for this discussion, Vicky Katz. Vicky is an associate professor in the communication department at Rutgers University, whose research focuses on digital inequality, learning, and technology use among children and families. She co-edits the Journal of Children and Media with Amy Jordan, and their collaborative research on how digital inequality affected remote learning for undergraduates this spring ultimately is what sparked this series of conversations. She lives in New York City with her family, which includes her very tired husband, 5 and 1-year-old sons, and also a new puppy. Vicky, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you for hosting us tonight. Maybe we'll stop adding complications to our lives that we can avoid at some point. But thank you to everybody for joining and for this all-star panel of quite tired parents for joining at what is almost 9 o'clock Eastern, because this is the time that you could get parents to have a conversation about burning the candle at both ends, which says basically everything about the discussion that we'll be having today. So let me introduce this wonderful group, which is diverse in many ways, including geographically, level at the university, and in many ways that you will come to see in terms of ages of children and family structures and so forth. So I'll start with Amy Gonzalez, who is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where she examines the costs and benefits of communicating over digital media and digital inequality, with a particular focus on members of marginalized communities. She has a 6-year-old son who is in full-time remote kindergarten, which is every bit as wonderful as it sounds, having had some experience with that myself. Sansan Lim is professor of communication and technology at the Singapore University of Technology and Design, and also the head of humanities, arts, and social sciences. Her research has principally focused on technology domestication by families and young people, including a recent book, Transcendent Parenting, Raising Children in the Digital Age, which focuses on how the growing use of mobile communication has intensified the parenting burden and influenced family communication, which could not be more apt for this discussion. She has a 17-year-old daughter, a 14-year-old son, and they are both back to full-time in-person schooling. David Stamps is an assistant professor in the Manship School of Mass Communication at Louisiana State University, and his research is aimed at understanding the psychological and behavioral effects of mass media engagement and how those effects relate to class, gender, race, ability, geographic location, and sexuality. One of his adorable sons has just joined us for a split second. He has 6 and 8-year-old boys who are back to in-person school after 7 weeks of remote learning. And last but certainly not least, my colleague at Rutgers, Khadijah Costley White, who is an assistant professor in journalism and media studies, the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers. She studies media and politics, particularly in regards to race, identity, and culture. She had 2 kids under 3 for most of this pandemic. They've now both had birthdays, so she's been upgraded to having 2 kids under 4. Everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for making time for this. So let's kick off with, how has the balance, which I'll use in air quotes, that you've been managing between work and parenting evolved or devolved for you since the pandemic became global in March? Amy, start with you.
Sure, although I'm just surprised that Khadijah is here. I mean, anyone with anyone under 3. So both, but especially if you've got 2 under 4. Whew, and by here, I just mean like here it all on earth. So I'm not sure I'm the first one to start. I mean, to be frank, certainly I think burning the candle at both ends is exactly what has happened, right? But so I'm a single parent, and we share my kid 50-50. And so to be honest, for me, in some ways, I am very much used to what I call all or nothing parenting. It's just that the all takes on a whole new level of all. And so but it means, I sometimes get the house to myself, which I never thought I would appreciate, but took a pandemic to appreciate divorce, apparently. So, I feel like I'm just a lot more tired. We'll leave it at that and then let other people weigh in with a little bit of their experiences. But I feel like it's happening. I'm still getting it done. I'm just very tired all the time.
Yeah, I'd love whoever would like to weigh in about just if you think of the sort of arc of this experience from that initial shock to being halfway through a fall semester, which for some of us is in person and some of us is remote. What's shifted or hasn't in the experience of sort of everything being at home for many of us?
Maybe I'll give it a go. So in Singapore, what happened was we were one of the cities, one of the countries in the world to sort of have COVID outside China. And there was a great deal of anxiety around what the university should do. And as the head of my faculty, I had to really think about contingency plans. We had to split our teams into teams A and B, and then we had to think about who could come in on which weeks and so on. And then progressively, the country also went into lockdown. And so suddenly, everything was migrating online, and then my 2 kids were studying online at home all day long. And so it was just a whole confluence of everything all at the same time, and having to think about looking after my faculty, looking after my students, looking after my kids. So that was really wearing. And then also having to dealing with all the meals all day long, whereas previously they would go to school and recess was taken in school. Suddenly I was also the recess lady. So that was really crazy. But since then, we've been able to sort of ease out of lockdown, and I'm glad to see my freshmen in the classroom. And I asked them whether their parents were anxious about them being in school and so on. But generally, the situation here is fairly well managed. So there is hope really at the end of the tunnel. So just hang in there.
That's good to hear, but I'm also smiling about the meals because every time I turn around, someone seems to need to eat again, and I just can't believe how often that seems to happen.
Oh God! This much milk this quickly. This is the only place I'm drinking it.
Everything folding in together. Khadijah, David, obviously everybody sort of had the shock of an experience in March and April. And then, if you didn't have children that were young enough, you didn't have care responsibilities that were still home, everyone sort of eased into a new normal. And at least my experience of that has been, if you've still got small children at home, there is no new normal. There is no life hack that is getting you out of this. Small children need X amount of time from you, and there's no way of telling them that there should be streamlined efficiency for that. So how either of you kind of experienced that, and how has it kind of evolved or not?
So I when you said the word balance, I almost like choked on my own. Like I was just like, I don't even know what that means at this point. Like I don't even know what people mean by balance. Like I think it's one of those things. It's like when people say like meditate through everything, and you're like, you picture a person trying to meditate while kids like throw toilet paper at their head. Like that is like what I hear when I hear balance. Because mostly it's just survival from day to day. And I actually am super lucky, right? Like I'm tenure track, fingers crossed I will get tenure and be the first African American on my faculty to do so. I I hope that, so I understand, I recognize my privilege. There's so many other precarious women of color and Black women in particular who are being laid off right now, right? So I should say that, and not only that, but I'm like especially lucky because I won a fellowship that allowed me to have this year to work on a project. And so I was already kind of transitioning to leave. And so like I'm lucky in that respect. But also I'm not sure if I took a shower today. So I think like so there's this like craziness that's happening where I had this whole vision of this year being something where I get to work on this project, which by the way is community based, and that's kind of gotten wiped out with COVID, and I've had to try to rethink everything. And I'm home, and I thought I'd have this time to like get my house in order because it's fallen up. I had a baby in 2018. My book got released the same month I had a baby. I did a book release party 3 weeks after that. Like, so it's been insane. So I thought this was going to be the year where my house no longer looks like I don't know, a tornado went through it like every day. And that's not what's happening. What's happening is I'm barely trying to keep on top of the filth that they do throughout the entire day, much less trying to get at all of the stuff that's piled up literally in my basement and everywhere in my house over the time that I've been on tenure track. So I don't even know how people without like partners are doing this at all. And we had a sitter for my daughter before all of this started. And so we just kept her throughout this because she's an older woman who lives by herself. And so we still get a little bit of help, but that like when both parents are home, it's not quite, it's not a release. It's just like everybody's hanging out together more than anything.
It's not the room of your own you thought this year of fellowship was going to be. Huh?
No, I was really, yeah. So, and I think that, I think we have to really think about that. I mean, I know we're going to talk more about it, but about the fact that not only are people not catching up or not keeping up right now, but like one will really need a recuperative period after all of this because the toll is so exacting. So,
David, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. So when my partner and I first had our first son, he's now 8. And everyone was reading parenting books about what to do and what not to do. And we kind of came to this conclusion was we're going to do what we need to do to get throughout the day. And that's how we've parented for the past 8 years. And so when my son was first born, he was super colicky and he hated everything. He didn't want to be in a car. He didn't want to be in a stroller. He didn't want to be in a car seat. And so at like 1 month old, we realized the only way he was content is if we played the Elmo song on YouTube on repeat, holding the screen in front of his face. And so at 1 month, he was introduced to technology. And I'm a big Sonia Livingston, Dana Boyd fan, so I believe in technology. And so when people would pass judgment, I would say, until you walk a mile in my shoes, shut your mouth. And now here we are 8 years later, and my son is super tech savvy. So when he had to sit in front of a screen for 6 hours, he was inquisitive and able to focus. And I'm like, you know what? There was a reason. There was a reason for all of this. And so,
David, you were ahead of your time.
I know. And so we've just always had this mindset of do what you need to do to get through. And so I feel bad some days because I'm on a tenure track. This is year 2 for me. And there's just a lot of work. And it doesn't feel like I'm getting a breath of air. Like it doesn't feel like I'm able to come up for air. And so some days my son will tap me on the shoulder and say, can we pop a bowl of popcorn and watch Despicable Me? And I think to myself, an hour and a half free? Absolutely. And so some days they eat 3 bags of popcorn and watch 3 movies, but I had 6 hours to get that manuscript worked on. Yeah. And so we've always had this mindset of do what you need to do to make it through. And we've held on tight to that. And what the pandemic has shown is absolutely hold fast to that. Whatever the day looks like, it's okay because you made it through the day. There have been days my kids have only eaten goldfish crackers because that's all they wanted, and I wasn't ready to fight. We made it through.
Yeah. I think that's a very good motto. I'd love to hear from you guys about what you think the points of invisibility have been about parenting in a pandemic in terms of what colleagues and universities see and don't see about the impacts of burning the candle at both ends and sometimes in the middle at the same time.
Well, can I say something really quickly, Vicky? Because I feel like when David was talking, I was like, even though we all have kids, I feel like because they're all at different ages, it's like we're at very different stages. So I can't sit my kids basically anywhere. I have one kid with special needs as well. And so I literally cannot leave him. I can't leave a room like for more than 30 seconds without being sick, like without there being a bang and a cry from
Wait,
one
I know I don't
child.
know you very well, but can I just like hug you like right there? I just feel so
Yeah, I mean, we're potty training. I can't
Oh my
wean,
God.
right? Like my daughter was 1 when this started, and I was like, she has to wean, and I'm with
You
her
can't
all the
leave the
time,
house.
and so I
Yeah.
can't wean her. Like so, and I co-sleep. So I mean, it's like a very intense period, and so I think one of the kind of invisible things is that people are like, oh, I have kids, and like they're talking about like their 12-year-old or their 13-year-old, and not about like a 2-year-old who, can't, or 3-year-old. My son does preschool virtually, who can't log into the computer and can't mute himself and can't so I also think that's one of the invisible things, I guess, is my response, is like the fact that not even everyone with kids is experiencing the pandemic in similar ways. Yeah.
And I think that's right. Is I've got kids that are, a gap that's further apart than is, the conventional 2.5 years, which seems to be what everybody does. Or Khadijah, you were ahead of
Mine is
yourself there.
8 years apart. So don't feel bad.
Oh,
No,
wow.
I've made my peace with it because I've got one that I can do what David does and say, oh, you'd like to watch a movie? That's great. But the other one is a 1.5 years, and there's just no way. And so I would say that the experience of having no help outside of your partner, the shift to having some of that care structure back is, for me at least, was a very humbling experience, because in June, our babysitter was able to start coming in again when the lockdown in New York ended. And it's humbling when you think that you are a capable person and that you can do a lot of things, to realize that without your infrastructures of care, whether it's babysitters, schools, or extended family, there's not much beyond just getting through. And yeah, I think that, Khadijah, to your point, I think that each age has its challenges, but the physicality of very young children just makes it that much more difficult, and not something that's comparable to a school age kid who's got more complicated challenges that they're facing around socialization and missing friends. But, they're not going to fall down the stairs if you turn around because your phone buzzed, right?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, we've had like a ton of issues even with our caregiver, kind of with my son with special needs, being like, he has too many needs, I can't really handle him. And so even trying to figure out whether or not to keep the caregiver has been really hard. And in normal circumstances, we probably say like, oh, if this is too much for you, we'd find another person, but that's not really an option right now. And so, but I'm sure lots of people are in relationships still, COVID relationships, they're not especially happy about. So I'm sure I'm not alone.
Some closer and some further away than the babysitter, for sure. What about the experience in terms of, there's studies all over the place about who's overseeing remote schooling and who's taking on kind of more of the invisible burdens of care. As things have unfolded, that 80% of men think that they are doing an equal amount of remote schooling, and 3% of women think that that's the case, kind of thing. And I'm just curious whether or not, for those of you who are negotiating divisions of labor with a partner, whether or not it feels like there are opportunities or openings to negotiate what different people usually do now that everyone is home all the time, or whether it feels like it's embedding old practices and just expanding them.
I can say in my partnership that we've always tried to play to our strengths. And my job, which is, you all know, is full time, but I have flexibility to when I want to work. And so I have a 2-2 load, and one of my classes is asynchronous online. And so I spend Sunday prepping, and I set it up and I let it go. And that's been a blessing in disguise in the midst of COVID. But it also means, because of that flexibility, I do pick up and drop off. If I'm not teaching, I do homework. I pack lunches. And it's because my partner was virtual teaching for 7 weeks, and now she's in school. And as a fifth grade teacher, it's a 7-8 hour a day for her. So my babies are 19, 20, 21, and I handle them as adults. You missed a deadline, that's going to be 10 points off. Make sure you submit it. Where she is dealing with, I don't know how old fifth graders are. And so I've taken on more of the day-to-day parenting roles just because my time allows me to. And I was going to speak to something that Khadijah mentioned. And so I have a colleague who came in with me. We have our little cohort, and she, similar to Amy, is a single parenting right now. And similar to you, Khadijah, she's also dealing with a young child that she cannot leave alone. And I had to call her up and say, I know you're going through a lot. What do you need? And it took months for her to finally say what she needed. And I was like, do you want to come over and just throw your kid in the playroom? New toys are always exciting. Do you want me to just bring you food? And she just would not tell me. And so finally I had to say, tell me what you need. I'm not going to leave you alone. And almost on the brink of tears, she said, I'm worried about the tenure track. Can you read some manuscripts? And if you have some projects that are budding, can I be second author? And I was like, absolutely. Like, we need to get points on the board. And so it was in that moment of having to say how important community is. So even if you don't have a partner, or if your partner has a very different viewpoint of what work should look like, I've tried my best, and I think we all probably have, of what does community look like? I don't know her lived experience, similar to I don't know many of your lived experiences, but I want to be available. And so I told her, I was like, I have a bunch of projects because I was just kind of socialized to be crazy and have a board of like 90 things happening. Thank you, UCSB, nod to Amy for just raising me up that way. And so I was like, here are 3 or 4 projects. You're second author. Let's talk about, how we're going to, divvy this up so we can make sure that you're good to go. And so she's been adopted as a part of our family, as far as like parenting in the midst of a pandemic on the tenure track at an R1. And so I just wanted to throw that out there because I can't imagine all of our different lived experiences, but I can't imagine what community looks like. And that's
I think that is such an important point. I think so much of what's happened since March has been so isolating, and that when you are just getting from hour to hour and day to day, you are, even if you have a partner in your home, you feel lonely in it, even though you're not ever alone, right? I mean, if I feel like I am never alone, Khadijah, you've taken that to like the power of, at least there's only another adult that sleeps in the bed with me. I mean, like, at least I get a little bit of time. It feels like my kids are not near me. It's a little bit, it's not much, but something. But just that sense of feeling so isolated and kind of getting through makes it very hard to sort of think about what would make it easier for you. And what makes it easier is feeling like there are other people who at the very least are moving alongside you, if not actually actively collaborating with you. But I'm curious, are there folks on this call that have had that experience of kind of finding those points of community that have made something about academic pandemic parenting easier? I mean, are there things that have felt, even if it lightened the load a little bit, it did?
So one thing that I ventured into for the first time was WhatsApp groups with my colleagues. And I think we had always tried to keep a distance and keep some boundaries. But because we were under lockdown, we set up these WhatsApp groups. And it was really nice because, we were trading tips over how to teach online. And at the same time, we were also sharing just funny moments and so on. And I remember just as we were emerging from the lockdown, I actually organized an online retreat with my colleagues. So we sent like fruit hampers to everyone everyone, and everyone had like little tea bags, which is nice, because it's like the water cooler, right? But we started off with a really fun event. I told everyone to share a photo of what the lockdown meant to you. And so there were people sharing pictures of like an entire living room with nothing but Lego and toys and so on. And everyone was sort of taking like 2 minutes just to articulate what was some of their most challenging moments during lockdown. And I think that feeling of solidarity, being able to forge that sense of connectedness, really brought everyone closer together.
That's wonderful. Has anyone else kind of had experiences related to work that have made it feel like, I mean, the academic enterprise is a lonely pursuit by definition. It is an especially lonely one right now, where there's so little time to think and so little energy for real thinking. I'm just curious if other people have kind of had these kinds of bright spots that, David helped manufacture and Sun did as well.
Mine wasn't so much work related, except that by potting up with another family who shared our risk level, right? That's part of the weirdness of this, is like trying to find and negotiate a script that has never existed about like where you fall on this risk spectrum, and then trying to find other people that you feel comfortable interacting with. And so we actually did it not just because, at that point we had probably gone, I don't know, 2 months where no one was interacting with like when I had my kid, it was just me, and then vice versa. It was switched, except that we would each go to the other person's house and like relieve the other person. So they would have like an hour a day. So, and then my kid started to get really depressed. And so to the point where we were getting pretty worried about him, it was really obvious. And so we potted up with a family that now we actually share the remote schooling with as well. So each of us takes a day and plays teacher. And so I do nothing on Thursdays except play kindergarten and first grade teacher. And to be honest, it suits me. Like, I like that. I like the extra time with my kid. I just work my schedule around it. Fortunately, we have very flexible jobs, but that has completely kept me sane, is finding a pod of people that I also can connect with and, have over to my house and have dinner with and feel comfortable with that, at the same time that they obviously give me way more work, even though technically my child is exclusively remote. So
yeah. Khadijah, have you had kind of moments of community and all of this that have helped at all?
I was gonna say no, because I was going up for tenure and I was doing like an IRB for this project at the same time throughout the summer, so everything was a little bit insane. But I realized that I also kind of potted up, but not really, not in a way that other people have. Like, I think other people who pod, like, their families kind of merge in a lot of ways. And really what I did was I have a friend who's a professor at Rutgers Law, and she was very pregnant this summer. And so, her son was her only child, at least at that time. And so I was like, why don't you let him come over, and we have a play set in the backyard and the kids can all play together. And I am, talk to my sitter if she's okay with watching 3 of them for a few hours a day. And my sitter's not here all day. It's only for a few hours that we have her, but I said that would be fine. So that's been kind of cool. And I thought it would be useful to them because, my son isn't in school. So I thought having a routine where they got to hang out with another person, they get to see their babysitter every day, makes them feel relatively normal. And so that's been the kind of, I guess, the one thing as an academic who's had a baby, when you see another academic mom about to have a baby, like all the publishing pressures that are hanging over you, and before you prepare for a second kid. So it's been cool to kind of be able to connect over that and to have her son here.
That's great.
Yeah.
David, I was thinking as you were talking that I had someone who swooped in and kind of did that for me, and it was Amy Jordan. She called me. It's been halfway through April and I was drowning. I had a traumatized 5-year-old who is an absolute extrovert and deeply sensitive, who had just had school and friends and home ripped away because we left the city for a while. And he literally, I didn't do anything that he wasn't wrapped around my ankle unless I went for a run. I did a lot of running in April. But she called me and she said, we should do this survey. Digital inequality is your focus. She's like, I've done work on undergraduates, which for me is an older group. She said, we need to find out what's going on with remote learning with undergrad. She's like, you've got your part, I've got my part. She said, I know you don't have space in your mind for much right now, but it won't be like that forever. And when you do have a little space that opens back up, you're going to need something that reminds you of who you are outside of being a caregiver for everybody else. And until you've got more space, I'll shoulder more and we'll make it even when you've got more time. And if I've thanked her for that once, I've thanked her 1,000 times, but now I have thanked her in a very public way because she knew that I needed something when I didn't even have space to know that I needed that. And in the process, we were able to capture, what 3,500 undergrads were experiencing. We thought we'd get 300, and people really wanted to talk about what they were going through, and it just kind of kept growing. But we've obviously been living through a public health crisis, but that hasn't been the only crisis that has fomented over 2020. Pandemics obviously evolved alongside and in intersection with global protests over anti-Black racism, calls for systematic reform to police brutality over the spring and summer and even the fall of this year. How is that factored into the weight of the care work that you're doing, both at home and with your kids, but also with your students, in terms of how you navigate and talk about these things? And obviously, this weighs differently on our Black colleagues, but it's the responsibility of all of us to be actively engaged in this and explaining this to our children. And so I feel like this is another layer of sort of the invisible stress of what's been going on. And so I want to give room for that and room to talk about how that layers on, because I'm not sure that it's something that's fully as visible as it should be to many people.
I can speak, I guess, for personal experience. So my research is steeped in folks and communities that arguably are vilified in the margins. And so in that is a lot of work on how Black folks are living and surviving and thriving amid all kinds of circumstances. But the pandemic and the racial unrest and the anti-Blackness and the white supremacy it didn't slow down. And it boggled the mind that in the midst of trying to promote social distancing, anti-Blackness picked up. And so I remember in March, April, May, just understanding that Black and Brown communities were hit twice, almost 3 times as hard, Indigenous communities very much so. And I had to abandon my program of research and partner with folks and say, we need to talk about this. How do we elevate Black voices? How do we elevate those needs? How do we talk about what it means to know that not only is a pandemic that much more harmful and threatening to your existence because of systemic racism and systemic inequalities, but that white supremacy has actually decided to just go full throttle. And so for me, it was an extra layer of stress because I was fortunate, and I guess that's the right word, that there were so many different institutes and so many different agencies that were just kind of throwing money at me because they were also interested in this. But that meant that I was working on 7 or 8 different projects, trying to elevate those narratives and understand those voices. And so, and then to read over pages and pages of open-ended data and to have all these surveys and to run a bunch of regressions and see, wow, people are nervous and are scared and are losing loved ones. And the fact that folks are called essential today, but they were deemed, disposable a few months ago, that reality sunk in and it broke my heart. And I actually, I remember I was talking to a friend of mine, and when I was 15, so 25 years ago, I had my first job making $4.25 an hour. The federal wage in the US is $7.25. In Louisiana, it's $7.25. And that means that in 25 years, we've decided to pay people an extra $3. Our federal government has decided that that's appropriate. So it's sad and it's shameful that our essential workers don't make a living wage, and that they're mostly Black and brown, and that they are being discarded by our federal government, and that white supremacy and anti-Blackness has doubled down on making sure that they stay oppressed. And so just the thought of it is heavy. Doing the research and telling people, see our humanity is heavy. And then from a personal level, Vikki, you brought up something that's interesting, and this is a little teaser from a piece I'm writing for you. But like, I stopped jogging after Ahmaud Arbery because I was like, where are we right now that I can't go running in my subdivision in Baton Rouge, Louisiana? Because it is Georgia. So it's just become this scary reality that Black lives don't matter. Even in the midst of a pandemic, we don't see the value in human life when it comes to class and race and our different intersectional identities. And here we are in November, and I can't really even celebrate a new administration coming in because the value is still not there. Liberation still doesn't seem within grasp. And there is no degree, no grant that will quell that anxiety and that fear and that reality.
And what does it do in terms of parenting? I mean, how has that made the burden of parenting Black sons through this year? Has it made it heavier, or this is the weight you would have carried in 2019?
It's the weight I always carry. I told you, my kids love technology. And so they watch and they listen and they know my research. Like, they were in the background when I was talking to each of you. I've probably given maybe a dozen different inclusion talks to churches and other universities and consulting groups. They overhear everything I say, and I am unapologetic. I am not nice, and I am not respectable when I am fighting for Black liberation. And so my 6 and 8-year-old hear that. They repeat that. They ask about that. And I want them to. I want them to grow up and say that my dad was unapologetic. He believed that Black lives matter no matter what the narrative was and no matter what the conversation was. But that means that we have some really uncomfortable car rides when they ask, is the pandemic real? And why did they say that on TV? And why are people marching? The first time my partner and I left the house after months of isolation because we were so worried about the pandemic was when I went to speak at a rally because Black folks were being hunted down and the pandemic was not slowing that kind of agitation among resentful white folks. And so they see it. So I carry it and I have those uncomfortable conversations with them, try to make it age appropriate, but they need to know because they're cute now. They're super cute now. But if society has told us anything, they have a few more years and then there'll be that threat. There'll be that deviance. They'll need that police conversation. And something has to change because the pandemic only exacerbated.
Khadijah, I can see you nodding along, and I know you've got thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I am thinking, I just found myself, I was listening to David about to cry, which I have not actually done this whole time, because I was thinking again about Breonna Taylor being murdered in her bed, right? And what it means to have a woman who was an EMT who literally risked her life on a regular basis to go into homes and care for strangers, be killed by police who didn't even bother to try to save her, right? Who murdered her while she was asleep. And so there is a level of horror that I think all Black academics who walk into these predominantly white governed institutions have to kind of compartmentalize. If I'm lucky, I get to bring some of that into the classroom actually with my students and talk about what's happening and talk about what it means to live every day in a space of horror. But I'm not teaching now, so I'm not doing that work. And so for me, I'm also an activist in my community. I do a lot of work around racial justice and equity and social justice here, and have a community nonprofit. And so we just organized. I mean, our response was like, everybody's been pent up anyway, right? Everybody's been stuck in their homes. We're gonna get out and we're gonna be together for something important. And a lot of our work is targeted to families because I live in the suburbs. And so we had, one march was like organized with kids speaking, and it was a field, like 500 families came out with their kids and sat down and listened to people talk. I taught them the people's mic. We did a march connecting, you know, our suburb, our kind of affluent suburb where lots of Brooklynites are fleeing, is bordered by predominantly Black, poor places, which always happens, right? Because somebody has to, you know, there's a kind of divide about work and who labors where. So we did a march from Newark to our town, and we did that in the name of like queer folks who've been getting killed. We did a die-in in the street that actually ended up on Good Morning America. And so I think for me, activism is always kind of the way I try to feel like I'm being productive, that I am trying to make the spaces around me better. And so one of the things that I kind of started organizing around was we found out that we have community police who are armed. They're just volunteers. They're not actually police officers. They're volunteer police officers. And so we pushed to get them disarmed, and we were successful a couple of weeks ago, which was really great. And took a lot of organizing around the community and getting people to go and speak. So I think that's how I've turned. I've turned to, you know, that's how I have to stay sane. I have a husband who's 6'3" and dark skinned like me, and I have a son who is gonna be just like him, and a daughter who's gone from wearing size 18 months to wearing 4T in the last like 6 months. And so like my kids are giant and they're beautiful, but I am constantly trying to figure out how to create a community around them that will protect them. And I think that's the other layer of work that happens with this kind of parenting. But also there's like something, I mean, I think that's why it's really funny when people talk about being suffocated by this pandemic, because I think spending time with my family feels precious, you know, like Black joy constantly feels precious. Black like love constantly feels precious. And so every hug I get from my kid, every joke my son makes, or like happiness of going down the slide, like those are all really precious to me. When you watch a police officer kill someone and watch him beg for his mother, or like last week when Walter Wallace was killed and his mother sobbed over his body, or Tamir Rice gets killed while playing on the playground, you understand how precious this kind of safety that my kids have, where they wake up every morning in my arms, when we know kids are in cages, you know, like that. To me, it's kind of like, actually all of this is magic for me on a regular basis, even when it's super exhausting. So I guess that's partly what this time has been for me. It's been me trying to like every day kind of center gratitude in like all the moments that I get to spend with my partner. And also I've been really happy about that time too. So I mean, that's like one of the offshoots, is that I didn't really, you know, he spends not long days, but he would get home normally around 7 o'clock at night, and then we'd go straight to putting the kids to bed. And I'd be completely exhausted because I would have been by myself with them for several hours before he got home after the sitter left. And now we get to share a lot of that. Like he's cooking and he's cleaning and he's home. And so I think the time with him has been really special to me too. So I think the horror is always there, but I think also it means that every moment feels really valuable.
Yeah, the best revenge is living well, right? To some extent, right? That the taking joy where you're not being accorded it and you're not being expected to have it is something. And
it's a form of resistance, I think.
Yes.
In this moment, and even and I back to the academic turn, like even when your colleagues don't understand what you're doing or don't understand the kind of pressure that you're under, and they kind of know, but they're also still asking for lots of things, that you feel like, you know, because you've been extended so much generosity on your own career, you don't want to kind of not extend that or return that generosity to others, but people don't really realize the cost are different right now. So yeah, I think living well is great if you can. And I also think maybe one of the things I wish I was learning or I knew how to do better was saying no to things. So yeah.
There's two things in what you both said that I want to pick up on, because I know that parent time is doubly precious and we don't have all that much of it left. But there's two things in what you've both said that I think are important. One is that we've been talking about the strains and difficulties of burning the candle at both ends. We'd be remiss not to reference the kind of pockets of joy and the opportunity that this opens, right? Of the kind of forced slowdown to having to live, at an 18-month-old pace or whatever it is, right? And that's not nothing. It's a big thing. I mean, my husband and I talked about, our little guy turned 1 less than a month before this happened. We were both there when he started talking. We were both there when he started walking. When he, we haven't missed basically anything this year. And everyone who's got 2 kids here knows you miss stuff the second time that you were recording every second of the first time. I felt like I got another maternity leave with him almost, but Dan was home for this one too, in a weird way, right? Because time stopped. I didn't know if I showered that. It resembled maternity leave in a lot of ways. There was someone attached to my ankle, and instead of my arms. But there's joy. There's pockets of joy in this, and I think that is a form of resistance, whether it's to the pandemic or broader, kind of concerns that have extended well before this pandemic started, right, with regard to racial injustice. But you've both picked up on community, right? And I think, Khadijah, what you were talking about in sort of finding sanity in organizing and in bringing people together, even at a time when we're, distancing physically in some ways, that socially we find comfort in each other. I wanted to kind of turn to, on any of the things that we've talked about, I mean, what should the response be from departments, from university leadership, to what parent scholars are carrying in this pandemic? Because hopefully we will be beyond this in some day not too far in the future, but it's going to be a while, and the effects of this are going to live on for a long time in people's productivity, and in all sorts of ways. What would help? What would be the points for action that can start moving us to a place that feels like care and community in this moment? It might be things that could help you, or it could be things that you think would help other people.
I can share one quick thing, and I thought about with this conversation coming up. So quick story, when I was a graduate student, so just a couple of years ago, I happened to be the Graduate Student Association president. So I was in a lot of rooms with our chancellor and our provost and our president, and we were having a conversation pre-pandemic about childcare. And I was invited because of that, my leadership role. And when I walked to the room, no one made the assumption that I had children and I had those other identities. And I share this with you all because we all are kind of sort of privileged to be on the tenure track or to have tenure. And even though we have children, we have this flexibility. But in that role, in that moment, as a graduate student who was making maybe $15,000 a year with 2 kids, the conversation centered around tenured and tenure track faculty needing childcare and needing support, with the erasure of grads and undergrads and hourly workers and folks who are a part of staff. And I remember in that moment that the conversation among 30 people was only about those on the tenure track and who were recently tenured and needing to up their research productivity. And I didn't have that identity then, but I realize right now, I'm doing okay. Like it is not easy. I'm burning the candle at both ends. But for the essential workers on my campus who have to clean dorms because we have kids living on campus and we keep the coffee carts open and the cafeterias open, they're making hourly wages. They don't have vacation days, and they're exposed to everyone. I have plastic shields in front of my podiums. And so in that moment a few years ago, I realized that when we talk about childcare and what it means to burn the candle at both ends, I wanted to recognize my privilege in that moment and definitely right now. So when we talk about what institutions can do and what our deans can do, is to think about those intersections of class and access and agency. Yes, the tenure, being on a tenure clock is hard. I am trying my best to stay productive and hustle, but I can't imagine what it would be like if I didn't have several days a week where I could work from home. And what it would be like if I was hourly and didn't have vacation time banked, or if I was an essential worker making a basic wage and still having all of the same responsibilities and having children. And so I think about, I don't want my administration to just think about me, but think holistically about how we all are trying to navigate, because I need the folks who are cleaning our classrooms and who are feeding, LSU students, and who are, taking care of the grounds. They are all important. They're not essential, because I don't like that word anymore. They're important. They're vital, and they matter. And their childcare has to be a part of that conversation as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you for broadening. I mean, it's very easy to focus on what's in front of us and our own experiences, but they are a privileged set. There's no question about that. Amy, any ideas, or Sun?
I was thinking, and because we've had some time to sort of emerge from lockdown and things are fairly calm now, that actually I am seeing what I might call new invisibilities, which is that since we've all shifted with some enthusiasm to the online space, so even though we're teaching classes in classrooms face to face, but professionally, all of our meetings are still online. And I think there seems to be the assumption that, well, online meetings are easy to do. And so, everyone's load is somewhat lighter, right? But actually, you find at the end of the day that you've had a whole schedule of back-to-back Zoom meetings or Teams or whatever, and you're spent, right? And I don't think we should assume necessarily that just because things are easier or more convenient online, that necessarily people are less burdened. The other thing also clearly with younger colleagues, early career academics, is that whole business of being invisible now is so much harder because you don't have that conference circuit. So my younger colleagues who've been a little bit reticent about being, self-promoting on social media and so on, now they've got to find that confidence, they've got to find that comfort level to want to project their research achievements and so on. And I think that's something that I need to nudge them towards. I had one particular colleague who never used his full title because he felt it was so, like he was bragging. And I said, look, if you don't tell people you're an early career award fellow, no one's going to know you got this meritoriously, right? So these are the kinds of ways in which people have to, think about being breaking out of that invisibility.
I think one of the things that you mentioned is probably a good reminder for departments, for schools, is that the question of whether or not we're working from home or living in our offices is, I think, a good one. The notion that, well, everybody's home anyway, and so scheduling meetings at all days, all hours, sending work on weekends, that the notion that we've lost whatever time was sacred and separate, is, I think, especially for people with children, the weekends are still, even if your kids are remote, weekends are still the time where they're not structured and where you can spend free open time with them. Making sure that work is not piling up on days where people shouldn't really be expected to be checking their email all the time, I think it's a small thing, but it's a tax. It's a tax to make people say no to meetings that are at 5:30 or 6 o'clock that is dinner time. We used to not expect, we wouldn't have scheduled an on-campus meeting at 6, but we have no problem scheduling a Zoom meeting that is. And, I think it's hard for people to say they can't do it, especially if they're junior or they're in precarious or non-tenure track positions. It's a small thing, but it's not, it's another tax. Amy.
Yeah, my points were actually going to be very consistent with what y'all are saying, because I was thinking, so I got really great advice from a parent, actually a parent who had a very premature baby, and then had a second baby, both before tenure. So parenting was very intensive for her. And I remember asking her before I got pregnant, like, how do you balance the research and the work and the parenting? And she gave me advice that I think has totally held, which was like, you find ways to do your research because you love your research. That's not actually what you have to protect. What you have to protect is your sanity and your relationship. And so I was kind of thinking about that. And I think that in some ways, like in thinking about the ways that the university could acknowledge what we're going through and how I realized they're struggling, the UC system has a very regimented kind of evaluation process. And I think they're really struggling with thinking like, okay, do I count X many hours of childcare as a paper, right? And I just feel like there's no way they're going to go for that, right? So I don't think that you can see a lot of lowering the bar when it comes to publication. I don't think that's actually where we need it. I think it's what I'm hoping is that people understand why my teaching evals are going to hurt and why I have less service and why I've gone to fewer conferences and why I have more like the way I've been able to get projects going and keep them alive and stay excited about them is by adding more authors than I normally would have added, right? So having community in my collaborations. So like feeling out the ways that my research looks different to adjust, but not expecting the shifts to be in, I mean, that doesn't mean that sometimes our research isn't suffering too, it is, but I think that again, that is what keeps us sane. That's why we do this job. Otherwise, we're kind of insane to end up in this profession in the first place. But I think finding ways to for these administrations to shift their expectations of what everything else looks like would be really the most helpful.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I mean, it's the research one experience, right? I mean, those of us who've selected into positions at research universities, I mean, that's the part that we find room for, but maybe this is the time to think about what service commitments really need to happen in this pandemic year. Are there things that are non-essential and non-important if we're going from the essential and important, right, David? I mean, are there things that are neither essential nor all that important that we can just sort of hold off and we'll do them again starting a year from now? Just declare bankruptcy on certain things for now.
Amen.
Yeah.
Khadijah?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking. I'm in part of a union, so it's another way that I'm actually really privileged. And
we really are. We are very lucky to have a very strong faculty union.
Yeah, and so we've gone through the pandemic fairly secure, right? So it's been almost kind of like being in a little bubble while you watch all sorts of folks lose their jobs and move and have to sell their homes around you. And so I think one of the things that is really great is that our union has been focused on trying to kind of leverage as much as they can, to the extent that they can, their power to protect the most precarious folks around them. And I feel like that is what tenured faculty everywhere should be doing. If there is a way to try to protect the workers or take a voluntary furlough or anything like that, that helps the folks who are the most precarious, who will be devastated, will lose their homes, lose their way to feed their families if they lose their job. I think that should be some of what's happening, and that goes to David's point too about graduate students and undergrads. I think being generous towards everyone is always a really good policy in a crisis, including students and colleagues. And I feel like, like I said, I went through the tenure process, which is not really forgiving during this whole thing. And to the extent that they could give me space, they did, but they're still like, this has to be doing it this way, and it has to be typed in this way, and you get the same forms 20 times. And so if people are doing that and going through that process, and I think I got some of that support, extend support, right? I mean, if that person is at home dealing with 2 toddlers and no childcare, maybe help proofread, or I mean, there's just things that ways in which people can step in if they really need to. And Virginia Tech actually came out with a really good letter about how we should be thinking about the long-term impact of COVID as well. And so a lot of times, even at my own job, the notion of equity is like, add a year to your clock, right? So like, for every kid, add a year to the clock. For this, if you're sick, add a year to the clock. And in certain ways, people think of that as equity, but actually, like, equity would be not expecting a million things when someone has 2 small kids, or not pushing people to get tenure later and later because they're having children and other people aren't. Because what you actually are doing is penalizing them long term when you push off their promotion and you push off their salary increase because they're having children. And so I think we have to really be thoughtful about how to protect people, and not just through this crisis, but like, what does it mean to have a crisis? Some people lost their families during this period. You know, my friend lost her husband. We had to stand outside and watch her and her two small children sob on the steps while we couldn't hold them in the middle of COVID. And so I think, you know, the fact that we have this kind of capitalist machine that expects you to just keep on pushing forward, even through grief, even through loss, even through isolation and depression and all of the things that naturally will occur during this crisis, is unbearable. And so I guess I'm hoping that we keep having conversations like this too, and not just having conversations, but actually in our schools, in our departments, saying like, what can we do materially? What kinds of policies can we put into place? What kinds of supports can we give to faculty members and graders and all sorts of things that make the load easier as we all get through this crisis together? I think that's partly what I've been thinking about, is just really kind of making these things not just the conversation, but really materially putting policies into place. It's not because I think, Vicky, to a certain extent, it's like the question of diversity inclusion that Black people and other scholars always get asked, or women, right? Like, what do you guys want? Like, what could we possibly do? And I'm like, this is actually a really easy question to answer, because like, we're expected to do teaching, service, research, right? And so what can you do to help people do those things? And those are like, it's a very simple like question, you know. What do people need for research? They need resources, they need grants, they need money, they need research assistants. What do they need for teaching? You know, they need graders, they need teaching assistants. And so in service, you can cut, right? Like, you can say, actually, the demands for service this year should be cut, especially for people who are at home with children. So I think if people stop kind of pretending that these are huge questions that can't be answered, when actually they're just very simple, we can find ways to do this on the ground.
I'm smiling because I'm thinking about but what does it all mean? It's like, no, actually, we know what it means. I mean, we know what it would take, and it's not the tinkering at the edges of, you get an extra year and you get an extra year. It's like, yeah, you're taking my raise and security away from me. You're giving me another year of this and that, right? UC Irvine is actually, you're getting another year on your tenure clock, but they will retroactively give you the raise. For the year earlier, right? So there are ways to do more than sort of tinker at the edges and give the easy bit. But I think, you know, what emerges from a really interesting conversation here is, how do we use this crisis as an opportunity to get clear on academics being whole people, not just people who produce research, not just people who stand in front of a classroom, but that you can actually be your whole self at work. Because I do think this creates openings for that, right? I mean, we literally see inside of each other's homes. We've met each other's children. That can be more than cute, right? That can be I think revolutionary in some ways. Of, you know, I am this, but I'm also this. I contain multitudes. I'm all of these things, and it's not limited to people with children. There are people doing other forms of care work that are getting even less attention right now. And that, you know, it doesn't need to be rendered invisible, because we can see it and we can respond to it and allow each other to be more whole. And in the process, I think, create a much healthier environment for graduate students coming up, that it's not only permissible to be more than your work, it is expected. And it's part of finding joy in a line of work where you get choices in how you shape what you do, but the structures around you need to help care and create community around you to enable that. And so much of that, I think, at this time is really, Khadijah, the list you were going through is, how can you support, right? And sometimes that's taking things off someone's plate completely. We don't need to do this year. We'll do it next year. And sometimes it's, what assistance do you need, whether it's financial or time or human, assistance in a research assistant or grading or grading, assistant. What do you need? How do I help ensure that you have what you need? What's the wraparound care to help get you through this in one piece, so that we are still whole people when this pandemic recedes. Anybody have any last thoughts before perhaps they take 15 minutes to themselves and go to bed?
I just wanted to say, I think this part of the conversation is beautiful. One thing I've realized, that when you ask people what they need, they will tell you. Like, people just want to have a voice. They want to know they matter. They want to be heard. And so for tenured faculty and for deans